Fossil emergency? Better hurry. Call Dr. TJ. Call now 1-800-555-DINO. That number again is 1-800-555-DINO. It's already too late. Even 4 out of 5 Darias do recommend calling, though. But more importantly, let's try to de-extinct Daria. The credo of TJ's Spectives channels. Expect to spectate and inspect all aspects of the spectrum of my respective perspectives. Hopefully they're not circumspect or suspect, but spectacular retrospectives of my introspection. No one expects an unsuspecting inquisition, or fangs like this. This is part 1 of 3, Predicting Evolution in the Age of Mammals. This is an extended version of a talk I gave at a Gem and Minerals show about 2015. Since it's expanded, hopefully there's a little more background and interest. We'll see, hence part 1 of 3 anyway. Is life predictable? Does form dictate function? Does function dictate form? Take a look at all these birds and their bills. Can you make sense of them? The toucan is a fruit grabber. Does that bill make sense? Pinecone pickers, crisscrossing bill. Get in between those petals and nip out pinecone seeds. Fish netter, the pelican. It's got a net. Does that make sense? The filterer, namely the pink flamingo. It's got little micro teeth for filtering out crustaceans in the water and turns its head upside down. Does that make sense? If you have a nectar sucker, does the bill match a flower? Is it adapted for feeding on specific flowers? Take a look at this simple example. Who's built for speed? 1, 2, 3, and or 4. Does the form tell you anything about the function? Even if you've never seen the animals before, can you interpret something about maybe how they moved or what they did for a living? Can you imagine a scenario of how long-legged tetrapods evolve? Fast movers, usually. Not always, but usually. Tetrapods are the four-footers. That refers to land-dwelling vertebrates, the bony animals, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. These are extinct organisms. No one has ever seen them move. Can you predict if these dinosaurs were fast or slow movers? Here are pangolin and aardvark. Their orders are represented by ancient single lineages and are not close relatives. You have the Pholidota, pangolins only, and the order Tubulidentata is the aardvark only. Just one species, poor little guys all alone. What are some traits that these termite anteaters share? Can you explain why they look the way they do? Take a look at their feet, their tails, their general body form. Are they gracile or robust? Are they built for running or power? And if they're built for power, what for? All I can tell you is the more fossils I see, the more I appreciate the genius of Darwin and natural selection. This, of course, contrasts greatly with stupid human tricks. We'll be talking a lot about convergent evolution today, organisms whose resemblances are due to similar natural selection, not inheritance from a common ancestor. The commonness and significance of convergence is underappreciated, sometimes I even think by fellow paleontologists. But if you work on fossils or modern biota, all you see are convergences. You jump to Australia, to Asia, to Africa, to South America, to North America, you see different lineages of organisms end up looking the same because they're doing the same sort of lifestyle. The union of form and function is what adaptation is. Convergence of fast fish eaters. They have teardrop-shaped bodies with stabilizers, namely fins, and they have strong tails. They keep their body still and they move the back tail very fast, and that's more efficient for swimming. They undulate their whole body like you see some fish do. There's a lot of drag if you move your whole body side to side. So let's take a look at a couple. Here's the shark, cartilaginous fish, and the tuna, a bony fish. Same general body shape. They're fast swimmers. Here's the extinct ichthyosaur. It's a reptile. Looks a lot like a dolphin. Well, they have the same sort of lifestyle. Fast swimmers chasing a lot of small fish. The highly convergent ichthyosaurs from the late Permian and whales from the Middle Eocene of the Cenozoic era, they evolved from land dwellers to fully marine forms 210 million years apart. They're not closely related at all. They're both amniotes, but that goes back a few 100 million years for the last common ancestor for them. Yet they end up looking the same. Well before whales, there were ichthyosaurs. Between ichthyosaurs and dolphins, there were mosasaurs, whale-like reptiles. Convergent evolution. Why do they all have teardrop body shapes? Well, it's efficient for reducing drag. If you just do wind tunnel studies or water stream studies, whatever you want to call it, you have a nice bullet shape or teardrop shape. 1/3 down from the nose tends to be the widest point, and that reduces the drag the most. So the shark, the tuna, the ichthyosaur, the dolphin, and a number of other vertebrates that have adapted this lifestyle have a teardrop shape with lots of keen stabilizers, in particular the pectoral fins that go left, right, up, and down, pitch and yaw. To convergence. Not whole body, but just part. Before teeth evolved, first jawed fish had plates, modified face bones. What do you need jaws for? Is to grab stuff. You want to grab stuff? What if it's slippery? You don't want it squirming away. What do? Put some hooks in your mouth. There you go. Teeth or tooth-like forms. Since dinosaur time, there have been several birds that have re-evolved functional teeth. During dinosaur time, most of the birds had teeth. In the Cenozoic, no birds have teeth, but there are some that have tooth-like forms. Namely, the merganser duck has tooth-like plates, face bone serrations, kind of like this Dunkleosteus, right? This placoderm fish, armored fish from the Devonian 375 million years ago. If you grab fish for a living, mouth hooks probably really do help. One, you want to grab it, swallow it, and don't let it swim back out. So those curved hooks in the merganser really help with that. And this is what real teeth look like. There's some shark jaws for you. And then real teeth actually evolve from skin scales. That's where they come from. Enamel, dentine, right? Skin scales in fish like sharks and bony fish. They have different layers just like that. Biological convergence can be at varying levels. Molecular convergence, tissues, body parts, whole organism, or even whole communities can evolve to be convergent, given similar conditions. You have the Pituahui and dart frogs. They evolve the exact same poison. Not very similar, the exact same poison. Homobatrachotoxin, right? And don't be licking this bird or licking any frog. You lick a dart frog, you don't want to do that. Desert succulents. In Africa, there's a couple groups that look like true cactus, but they're not. Well, why do they look that way? Well, you live in the desert, you have to conserve water, and you don't want people eating you. So you might want a lot of protection. You might want thick, waxy skin, so you're not losing water right through your own tissue. So you end up with similar forms and similar environments. Deserts around the world have cactus or cactus-like plants. Whale and turtle flippers. Any tetrapod that evolves to the marine world will evolve flippers, right? They're better than just toes and fingers for swimming. And they're all going to look the same. They're going to have many toe bones, and sometimes they have many fingers. So whales, turtles, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, mosasaurs, they evolve flippers, highly convergent flippers. One of the best lines of evidence for natural selection is simply convergence. And on the flip side of selection is overlooked, stabilizing selection. Continual selection maintains genes generation after generation. The genetic code and its express adaptations are not destroyed by random events. Think about sexual reproduction, the shuffling of genes. How many errors must be made, and how many don't survive to reproduce those errors? So stabilizing selection is another good reason to think that natural selection happens. If you look at how you take glucose and break it down anaerobically to get energy, ATP. A couple billion years ago, bacteria evolved that, and it hasn't changed much since then. 2 billion years, and you're breaking down glucose to make ATP pretty much just like bacteria did. In fact, the mitochondria that do that are bacteria that were co-opted by your great ancestors a long time ago. There are not an infinite number of solutions to biological problems. In fact, it's just the opposite if you look around. It seems to be quite small, judging from the number of times the same solution evolves independently. There really are only 1, 2, or 3 ways to do something well, from a physics and chemistry point of view. Adapting to similar selective pressure results in similar traits. Let's look at an example. How to distract or even intimidate predators. Evolve eye spots. Insects, reptiles, fish, even mammals. Hopefully you'll never see this. But if you see 4 eyes from a tiger, when it is attacking, it'll turn its ears around and you'll see the white eye spots. And then it's real eyes. You have 4 eyes and 4 fangs coming right for your throat. I hope you never have to see that. Worried about tiger or lion attacks? How do you protect yourself? They're often slow on the uptake. Humans do see solutions that nature has solved again and again. You can paint eyes on your cattle, or wear a mask with eyes on the back of your head when you're traipsing through tiger country or lion country. If you're jogging around LA and you're worried about mountain lions, put a mask on your back of your head with some eyes. You might intimidate the lion to think, oh, he's looking at me, I won't attack. But you're running, he still might come for you. That is what I call bioengineering, just painted eyes. The word of the day is ecomorph. Why? Because we can't get enough jargon. Unfortunately, different disciplines have a lot of jargon, particularly in science. Or go talk to a lawyer or a business person. Always jargon, jargon, jargon. Right? I prefer simple, but there are a number of terms that are just too useful. An ecomorph is easily understood when you know the words ecology and morphotype. Morpho just means shape. So this has to do, the ecology is influencing the shape of an organism. So ecological morphotype is shortened to ecomorph because it's cute and sassy and it's a good way to get a name for yourself or come across with an idea very simply and succinctly. This was coined by Williams in '72. Did some great work. So there's no underlying mechanism to explain convergent evolution. They're just oodles and oodles and oodles of coincidences. We can look at convergent forms from placental mammals to marsupial mammals. Most of them, well, about half the marsupials have pouches, so they often call them pouch mammals, but only about half of them do. If you look at the marsupial mammals of Australia, Australia's been isolated for about 80 million years, and compare them to placental mammals in the rest of the world, you see a lot of convergent forms or ecomorphs. You have a mouse and a marsupial mouse, convergent ecomorphs. Flying squirrel and a flying phalanger in Australia. Then you have a mole and a marsupial mole in Australia. Just remember that placental mammals are not superior to marsupials. Humans always tend to think in those terms. They're just different. They're not superior. Almost all the Australian fauna and flora evolved in isolation for 80 million years. Placental ecomorphs, another set, groundhog, squirrel, and the wombat in Australia. They're pretty good ecomorphs. You have a rabbit and a bandicoot. Those are pretty good ecomorphs. Little hoppers, big ears for cooling. Anteater and numbat, right? Anteater of South America, the numbat of Australia, or the striped anteater it's called. Quite a few things in common. And of course, I already mentioned these other anteaters or termite eaters. Aardvark and pangolin. There's quite a few anteaters on the planet. Right? Why do they end up looking the same? Well, what do they do for a living? Why do they have a long snout? Why do they have long sticky tongues? Why do they have powerful claws? You try to break open a termite nest made of dirt and termite stuff. Right? It's like concrete. If you name an organism, usually finding an ecomorph is piece of cake. Easy as pie. You have foot diver ecomorphs. These are seal eco-equivalents. I decided to throw seal eco-equivalent in for fun. Basically, they live like a seal, but they did it in a different way. They're about the same body size and they hunt small fish. In the modern world, we have the loon. And then in the Cretaceous period, we had a toothed bird called Hesperornis, right? In 1871, Marsh made world news when he reported on toothed birds. The Darwin's Origin of Species book was still hot. It was published in 1859. So other scientists across the globe were trying to find evidence that natural selection occurred or didn't occur, as a good scientist does. And as predicted, bird ancestors or older birds, more ancestral birds, had teeth. And there you go. Marsh described them in great detail and did a wonderful job. And Hesperornis hit the world map in 1871. And it's still famous in Kansas for all of you who haven't been here. Our chalk beds are some of the best in the world for late Cretaceous fossils, late Cretaceous marine fossils. Giant clams, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs. Once in a while you get a flying reptile, pteranodon, and so forth. Anyway, take a look at cavefish. All across the world, you have cavefish evolving and going extinct again and again over the eons. You look at the modern ones, they all look pretty much the same. They're blind. Well, you live in a dark cave, there's absolutely no light. What do you need eyes for? If there are genetic mistakes that affect the eyes and you don't use your eyes, then it doesn't matter. There's no maintaining selection to keep eyes. And so when mistakes are made and they don't affect your reproductive output, then it doesn't matter. So you end up looking like that. Blind fish, clear skin. Why is it clear? What's it need color for? It's dark. No one sees color. It's dark, right? And so on. These ectomorphs are rather interesting. You have a true snake, a garter. Then you have legless lizard, the family Annelidae. And then another family, Anguidae, you have the glass lizard. Well, if you're a burrowing reptile and you burrow a whole lot, it helps if you have more like a worm shape rather than limbs. So they lose their limbs totally or maybe almost totally. So glass lizards and the legless lizards are snake ectomorphs. And guess where snakes actually evolved in the Cretaceous? They came from burrowing lizards. Imagine that. So how do you think a penguin evolves? It's a bird that flies underwater to hunt schools of fish. Oh, and they're like little bullets underwater. I was strafed snorkeling in the Galapagos Islands. Are there living birds that hunt fish but are not as marine adapted as the penguin? Are there any birds that converge on the extreme penguin lifestyle living today? Or in the past, right? We're paleontologists now. Here's an example of geographic separation of ectomorphs. For the most part, ectomorphs will evolve at different times or different places. You're not going to get the same animal evolving twice in the same place. Competition is too strong for that, almost always. So here we have niche specialization, flying in water to chase fish. You can start with something like this. Petrels to diving petrels to penguins in the southern hemisphere. In the northern hemisphere, we have convergence series of adaptive types, not an evolutionary series, just examples of steps in evolution. For the northern hemisphere, you have gulls, razorbills, and auks. So if we look at their adaptations, petrels and gulls have wings for aerial flight only. They feed at the surface. They just dip down their bills and grab fish. Diving petrels and razorbills dive in the water and they swim some. Penguins are extensive submarine flyers. In fact, they can't fly at all, right? They're flightless. Auks, including the puffins, which are a type of auk, they can still fly, but they are extensive submarine flyers. They get in the water and they're almost as good as a penguin chasing fish. It's very impressive. So, predictability. Convergence is not only the rule in evolution, but convergent adaptive grades help us understand evolutionary steps, what might have happened in the past. You have the ectomorph pairs of petrel and seagull, diving petrel and razorbill, and the penguins and auks. Did the seagull evolve in the razorbill or razorbill evolve into the auk? Well, of course, no. But it's easy to see how auk or penguin ancestors became highly aquatic. Can you also figure out how sea turtles or seals or perhaps sea otters evolved? Here we have a river otter at the beach and sea otters. These are carnivora mustelids, the weasel family, etc., and their subfamilies Lucinae. You have the river otters and the sea otter. Can you imagine a scenario of how a river otter evolves into a sea otter? How might a river otter ectomorph evolve in the first place? Here's some otter ectomorphs down in Central Africa. They're Patamogalidae. Their closest relatives are tenrecs, and tenrecs are hedgehog ectomorphs of Africa. So if you've ever been to Europe and seen cute little hedgehogs, the tenrecs aren't true hedgehogs. They're not shrew relatives. They're in their own group down in Africa. They look just like hedgehogs, don't they? Basically, they're armored roly-poly shrews. So, how and why do you think Patamogalids evolved into otter ectomorphs in Africa? Right? Otter shrews is the common term, but they're not otters nor shrews. Can you imagine a scenario of how a shrew ectomorph evolves into a mole ectomorph? Where do shrews live? Do shrews dig at all? Do any eat a lot of earthworms? Well, there's a mole. The order is Lipotyphla, the family is Talpidae. And there's a shrew, same order, and the family is Cervicidae. And there's a shrew mole, because, you know, if you have a mole and a shrew, you might as well have a shrew mole. They're true moles, they're talpids, but they have shoe-like hair, so they call them shrew moles. So they're not quite like the other moles in the group. And if you have a shrew mole, why not have a mole shrew? These are shrews. There's several subfamilies. One is Myocervicinae, the other there is Anurocervicinae, the African mole shrew and the Taiwanese mole shrew. So these are shrews adapting to the mole lifestyle once again. They did it way in the past, way probably in the early Eocene, where shrews evolved into moles, what we call talpid moles. But there are lots of times shrews or shrew-like organisms evolve into mole-like organisms. And there are examples today of shrews, once again, evolving into the mole-like niche. If you're digging around in leaf litter and eating earthworms once in a while, well, you could dig a little deeper and get lots of earthworms, and so on. So you might be able to see how they would evolve. These convergence and evolutionary grades of shrew and mole ecomorphs tell us how they evolve. So is evolution predictable in other ways? Do we find other patterns? Repeated patterns that beg a cause? Well, I'm leading the witness, of course. The answer is yes. Through the Cenozoic, mammals trended to increased cursorality, running adaptations. Running in quotes, I'll explain later. Hypsodony, taller teeth in herbivores. Increased brain complexity and size. And increased body size. Now, by trend, I mean a great portion. Not every single mammal integer ecomorph type you look at through the Cenozoic is going to show some or all of these trends. But a great majority of them do. So I think the trends are real, and I will try to prove it to you, or at least make you think hard about it. What more can you ask for? So if these trends are real, what caused them? Well, let's get some background on the Cenozoic. The Cenozoic is the age of mammals. It should be called the Age of Mammals and Birds, because birds went through a similar adaptive radiation as mammals. They parallel in many ways, and that would be convergence of another talk, not this one. I do love birds, don't know as much about them. The Mesozoic era was dinosaur time, is what most people think of, the age of reptiles, 251 to 65 million years ago. Dinosaurs were the dominant land animals through most of the Mesozoic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. The Triassic is funky weird in a number of ways, but that would be another talk as well. After the Mesozoic, meso means middle animals, you have the Cenozoic. Ceno is recent, so Cenozo is recent animals. If you know some Greek and Latin, you learn a lot about science, and scientists use very simple names if you know Latin and Greek or some other languages. Usually it's very simple-minded. Brontosaurus, thunder lizard. It's hard to imagine something simpler than that. The Cenozoic is divided into periods. So you have the Paleogene, the ancient time, then the Neogene, the newer time, and then the fourth time, the Quaternary. There used to be a tertiary as well as a secondary and primary, but I won't get into that. For now, Paleogene, Neogene, and Quaternary are the periods of the Cenozoic. Some people don't really think the Quaternary should exist, and we should just all call it Neogene. It's just semantics. It doesn't matter that much to me. It's just names. Epochs are named for similarity to modern clam faunas. So this is why they all end Paleocene, Eocene, all scene. The Paleocene are the ancient recent. So the clam faunas of Paleocene don't look much like modern clam faunas at all. The Eocene are dawn recent. They're starting to look a little bit like modern clam faunas. So 55 million to 34 million years ago is the Eocene. The clam faunas throughout that time, throughout the globe, not just in North America, throughout the globe, they start to look a little bit like the modern clam fauna. Oligocene is few recent. So there are a few Oligocene clams that actually, hey, looks like the recent one, or the same genus that was alive in Oligocene. A few of them are still alive today. Miocene is less recent. So it looks a lot like the modern, but not quite as much as the Pliocene, the more recent, or the Pleistocene, the most recent. The Pleistocene is also called the Ice Age. And then we have the Holocene, the modern time. That's the last 11,000 years. Whole recent. Okay, we can look at the Cenozoic era in terms of the climate change and some of the mammals you would find at different times. So the Paleogene has different epochs, and the Neogene and the Quaternary. So if we start down at the bottom, geologists always work for the bottom up. So you may see I say 65 to 24 million years ago. Geologists, I'm a geologist too, they tend to think older to younger. So that's why you always start at the bottom, the geologic column. We have the Paleocene. Middle latitudes were paratropical. Middle latitudes, we're talking about 30 to 50 degrees across the continent of the North America. Actually, across the globe. It's pretty much the same. In the early Eocene, you had tropical climate, all the way to 60 degrees latitude at its warm zenith. So if you're in southern Canada 52 million years ago, you would be in a multistratal canopy forest, just like in Brazil, over a meter of rain. Tropical, 60 degrees latitude. How do we know that? The fossils, plants, fossil animals tell us that. The fossil clams tell us. You just go off on the coast and look in the ocean, or the ocean rocks that are not on land. You'll see indicators of tropical habitat from many lines of evidence across the entire globe. Right? That's science. When you get many observations that agree, you can start to understand and believe that, oh yes, it was tropical in southern Canada 52 million years ago. Oh look, palm trees. Yeah, palm tree fossils. Anyway, the rest of the Eocene was paratropical at middle latitudes. Global temperatures kept dropping. In fact, the zenith of 52 million years ago, all the way down to the Ice Age, right, global temperature's been dropping. Not continuously or steadily, it goes up and down quite a bit, but overall, you've had global cooling for the last 52 million years, all the way into the Holocene. Whoops. The next epoch is the Oligocene. Right? What's odd about the Oligocene, you don't just have a shift from paratropical at mid-latitudes to warm temperate and more open habitat, but it's unusually dry. The last three cores of the Oligocene into the Miocene are very dry. Giant horse latitudes or something. I've never had it or read a good explanation of why the middle latitudes were so dry. Much more than you predict based on temperature. During the Oligocene, if you're in Wyoming or Nebraska, there's little to no frost or freezing. Right? That's how warm it was, warm temperate. The Miocene was warm temperate and then became cold temperate. So there was an early to middle Miocene warming. And then since about 15, 14, 13 million years ago, it's been cooling greatly, especially through the latest Miocene, then the Pliocene, the next epoch, and the Pleistocene, which is the Ice Age. Ice Age is about 2.4 million years to 11,000 years ago. It's important to note that the Ice Age had cooler summers and warmer winters than today. Life was good unless you sat next to a glacier or tried to live next to a glacier. People always think the Ice Age wasn't really harsh. Actually, today's climate is much harsher. We have colder winters and hotter summers. We won't talk about global warming, but there you go. So the Holocene is the recent time, last 11,000 years. If you look at some of the mammals throughout the Cenozoic, give you some idea, and I'll show you some paintings next. We have hyenodonts in the early Eocene. As you might have guessed, a lot of them kind of look like hyenas or adapted like hyenas. Hyena ecomorphs, if you please. These are a type of creodonts or primitive carnivores. During the first part of the Cenozoic, the order Carnivora did not dominate the carnivore niches. There were other carnivores, in particular creodonts. They were the main carnivores across the planet. Hyenodonts are one group of those. Maiacids, those are true carnivores. They did pretty well. Mesonychids, big-headed carnivores. They did pretty well. Panelestids, not really common. They were otter ecomorphs, kind of cool little things. I rather favor them. In the early Eocene, you had proprimates and primates. So you had more ancestral primates and true primates. The primates that are alive today, their ancestors can be traced back all the way to the beginning of the Paleogene, the Paleocene, or maybe even the latest Cretaceous for true primates, but probably just proprimates. True primates probably come in maybe late Paleocene rather. Then you have families like Plesiodapids and Omomyids, proprimates and primates. Nyctotherids, probably tree shoe ecomorphs. Panodonts, herbivores, mostly they were gorilla sloth herbivores, except for a hippo ecomorph. So they were pretty common at this time. Paleonodonts, they were diggers. They might have given rise to Pholidota, which are the pangolins. So mostly insect eaters and diggers. Phenacodonts are plant eaters that probably a lot like hyraxes, except maybe one was like a tapir, small to medium-sized mammals anyway. Euanthotheres, giant mammals at the time, rhino ecomorphs, funny horns, easily recognizable. You had the first horses right at the beginning of the Eocene. Dicobunoids, the first artiodactyls, right at the beginning of the Eocene. Sciuravids and Iscaromyids, those are squirrel ecomorphs. early opossums, and a bunch of other mammals. If we jump up to the early Oligocene, you had true dogs, canines, Hesperocyanes canines to be exact. You had Nimravid saber-tooths, a whole radiation of Nimravid saber-tooths. You had woodland horses, no grasslands at this time. Grasslands don't come into the Miocene. So horses barely got through the Oligocene, not a lot of diversity, but they did really well in the Miocene and on into the modern world. Rhinos and relatives. You had true rhinos and their relatives in the Oligocene in North America. You had, of course, had true tapirs. You had oreodonts. They were dominant herbivores. You may have heard sheep-like pigs. They're more built like peccaries with sheep teeth, really. Then you had true peccaries in the Oligocene. You had predatory pigs. If you can imagine a giant pig form that was 6 feet or more at the shoulder. They were omnivorous. They ate oreodonts and they ate plants. And apatomides, an eye ecomorph. Really cool. You should look up the eye. It's a lemur of Madagascar. And then you had ancestral relatives in the early Oligocene of opossums, pikas, rabbits, squirrels, mice, weasels, martens, beavers, etc. If we jump up to the middle late Miocene, Borophagine dogs were the dominant dogs at that time. They replaced the Hesperocyanes, right? And then canines will replace them soon. You had bear dogs and bears and dog bears. River otter, ringtail, coati, gomphotheres. Gomphotheres like shovel tuskers, so they're elephant ecomorphs. Pronghorns. There's only one alive today, but 7 to 14 million years ago, they were the dominant herbivores. Camels. Camels occupied a number of ecomorph niches. Giraffes, antelope, some other ones. Peccaries. You have woodland and grassland horses. Chalcotheres, which are basically gorilla giraffes. They're kind of built like giraffes, but they use their forelimbs to tear down trees, to eat leaves. So I call them gorilla giraffe ecomorphs. For a lot of things in the past, there's not an exact ecomorph that's alive today, but you can see parts of ecomorphs, or you make up a new ecomorph category for understanding. So there you go. You had true rhinos in North America, and of course still had tapirs. Right? They're still alive today, and just get into Mexico now. Pikas, rabbits, beavers, mountain beavers, big radiation. Mylagolids are burrowing rodents. One of them was horned, pretty cool. Kangaroo rats, hedgehogs. We had true hedgehogs through most of the Cenozoic in North America. Then the true hedgehogs, they went extinct in this part, but they survived in Europe and so on. Anyway, so that gives an idea of the general climatic change through the Cenozoic, which you need to keep in mind if you're studying Cenozoic mammals and other organisms of the Cenozoic. And for pictures of pretty mammals, there you go. This is a painting by J. Matterness. He inspired a lot of people. He did a lot of great detail in his work and lifelike poses. So he's a great artist. We have the rhino ecomorph, the Uintathere I mentioned. We have the tropical deer ecomorph, the first horse. The first horse did not live like horses you think of. It really lived like a tropical deer 55 million years ago. Ate a lot of fruit and leaves. Little small thing, like poodle size. Hyena ecomorph, a hyenodon. Imagine that. Saber-tooth ecomorph, oxyanid. Before Smilodon, a true felid, there were several other cat-like animals that filled the saber-tooth ecomorph niche. Lion ecomorph, oxyanid, primitive or ancestral type of carnivore. Lemur ecomorph, plesiodapid. Hippo ecomorph, Coryphodon. Some people argue that, and I'm still sticking with hippo ecomorph. Tapir ecomorphs. There are a lot of things that did the tapir lifestyle, including true tapirs, but there are a lot of other things. There was even oreodont that did tapir-like lifestyle in the Miocene. One of the last living, or the last living oreodont was a tapir ecomorph. Weird, huh? Squirrel ecomorphs, Sciurovids and Iscaromyids. So lots of squirrels, lots of trees. You expect a lot of squirrel rodents. Late Eocene to early Oligocene. Here's another painting by Maternes. Oreodont Artiodactyls were dominant herbivores in North America for 2 cycles, 14 million years, 36 to 22 million years. And no one seems to care about oreodonts. Great fossil record. They're just not worked on much, unfortunately. Here you have a rhino ecomorph, a different one. After Uintatheres, there were Brontotheres. Right? Brontotheres are perissodactyls. That group still alive today includes horses, tapirs, and rhinos. The Brontothere, they're cousins to all those, not closely related, but they certainly looked and acted like rhinos. Predatory pig, there's an entelodon I told you about, up to 6 feet or more at the shoulder. Big. Woodland horse ecomorph. So we had true horses living in the woodlands. Bullet deer ecomorph, protosaurodid, bullet deer or chevrotain. All right, chevrotains are alive today in Asia and one in Africa. Saber-tooth ecomorph, a nimravid, not a creodont, but a nimravid now, is filling the saber-tooth ecomorphs. Woodland browser ecomorph, oreodont. I'm not sure if I should call them deer ecomorphs or what. I'll work on it. Horse ecomorph, heracodont. A horse or maybe a peccary would be better, but a lot of people think of them as horse-like, so we'll go with that. Middle Miocene North American mammalian fauna. Here are some of the players at that time in the middle latitudes of North America. We had the shovel-tusker elephant, the gomphothere. We had the hippo ecomorph. This time it's a true rhino that does the hippo-like lifestyle. It's not a hippo, but it apparently lived like a hippo. But once again, people argue against that one. I'm still sticking with hippo ecomorph on that one. Antelope ecomorph, a dromaeosauride. Marmot ecomorph, horned mylogolid. So it's a rodent that kind of lived like the woodchuck or the marmot of today, and it had horns, apparently for predator detection. Predator protection. We had true rabbits, of course. Small antelope ecomorph was pronghorn. Pronghorns had their heyday about this time. And a bushbuck antelope ecomorph was protosaurodid, an extinct family of artiodactyls. And there's a grassland horse, a true horse, an equid. So the early Cenozoic mid-latitudes were paratropical and tropical. In the late Cenozoic mid-latitudes were warm and then cold temperate. Global temperatures decreased overall from a tropical high at mid-latitudes in the early Eocene 52 million years ago to the cold temperate Pleistocene, which ended 11,000 years ago, the end of the Ice Age. The Holocene is colder temperate than the Ice Age. Keep that in mind. So, Cenozoic climatic trend of the past 52 million years. You can look at lots of data sets that tell you the same thing. This one I think is particularly interesting. In the early Eocene, 52 million years ago, there were giant tortoises, crocodiles, and tapirs at Ellesmere Island in northernmost Canada, nearly 80 degrees latitude. Crocodiles, 80 degrees latitude. Today, crocodiles don't do so well in polar regions. Giant tortoises, no. Polar regions, no. These are freeze-intolerant animals. Tapirs don't like freezing. Crocodiles, they can't survive it very well at all. Nor can giant tortoises. So at this time, these freezing-intolerant vertebrates were in northernmost Canada all the way down the tropics of Mexico. How is that possible? Well, there was little to no freezing here 52 million years ago. The mean month temperatures have been estimated from shells, marine shells, from winter to summer, about 1 degree Celsius to 20 degrees Celsius. So it was cold temperate. Summers weren't too bad. Winters never froze, but it was still cold. So a lot of the animals pretty much went dormant. Didn't have a lot to do. Plus you have the darkness of the polar winters. That doesn't change because of the tilt of the Earth. So the approximate paratropical northern limit 52 million years ago was right through the center of Canada. So most of Canada was paratropical 52 million years ago, and then tropical in southernmost Canada at this time. And then all the way down to Mexico, tropical. So if we look at the rest of the continent, the shrinking paratropical floral belt through the Cenozoic, and compare that with the vertebrates, we find they agree. This is how we do science. If you find several lines of evidence that show the same pattern, you tend to think it's true, especially if you do it for decades or centuries and keep finding the same thing. In Asia, North America, Africa, South America, Australia, the same patterns, you start to believe these things. So in the early Eocene, we had cold intolerant vertebrates. Crocodilians, giant tortoise, the tapir, all the way to 80 degrees latitude, northern Canada. The paratropical limit was through the middle of Canada. So you're talking 60 down to 50 degrees latitude, somewhere in there. We don't know much about those floras. We don't have the data yet. Hopefully they'll be finding new fossil sites and know more about the floras of the early Eocene in northern Canada. Then, in southern Canada, by 40 million years ago in the late Eocene, is the paratropical northern limit. So we still have tapirs, giant tortoises, and crocodilians just above that line. They're nearly the same, but the vertebrates tend to be a little bit higher latitude than the northern belt, or the estimated paratropical belt anyway. If you jump ahead from late Eocene to late Miocene, 30 million years in the future, The belt hasn't moved that much. It's only dropped down a little, 48 degrees all the way down to 40. So that's the late Miocene. And the northern extent of tapirs at this time, late Miocene, was just a little above that. So where are we? Idaho, Montana. And then giant tortoises, even a little higher in the late Miocene. If we jump ahead 7 million years in the late Pliocene, we can see the paratropical northern limit is through the middle of the contiguous U.S. The modern paratropical northern limit is the southern U.S. We can see alligators. They're a little more cold intolerant than crocodiles. The alligators are a little above that. They're not on this side of the U.S. because it's just too dry. Alligators, they love their water. There are still a remnant population of crocodiles in North America, and they are way down in southern Florida, right? Down to the tip of the tropical belt. This shrinking paratropical floral belt to the Cenozoic gives us a times arrow. Right? This should create a pattern in the evolution of mammals and really plants and everything else. This climatic trend has been named many things through the decades. Contracting tropics as opposed to paratropics. Increased seasonality. Increased open habitat. Climatic deterioration, which is kind of funny because the so-called cooler, drier climates is what gave rise to modern humans. So to have a negative word like deterioration doesn't make much sense to me. It's a bit of an egocentric thing. Maybe humans really are tropical animals, but with clothes and fire and other tools, we can do well in Arctic regions. The early to middle Miocene warming trend of 24 to 15 million years ago is not plotted. And giant tortoises of the world only survived the Pleistocene on tropical islands. Off the coast of Africa and off the coast of Ecuador, the Galapagos. There are giant tortoises in a couple places in the world. Everywhere else, gone. It's so sad. Anyway, at the simplest level, terrestrial vegetational structure reflects the energy input retained from the sun and other factors affecting climate of the region. Topography. You have mountains. If you're in the rain shadow, that could be a condition that matters. The amount of rain you get based on ocean currents and wind patterns, etc. And in turn, mammal faunal structure, size distributions, what they're eating, their body shape, how they move, that reflects vegetational structure. So mammal faunas are actually good indicators of a region's climate. If you don't believe that, then study modern climate and modern mammal faunas and compare, say, tropical fauna of Africa to South America to Asia and look for convergence and convince yourself that mammal faunas can reflect the climate they live in. So climate change through the age of mammals once again. We have the greenhouse world in the early Cenozoic and the icehouse world in the late Cenozoic. This is the global temperature trend. This is based on oxygen isotope data from marine shells. So it's a pretty good indicator for temperature change. There's a complication with ice volume changes. But if you know some geology, some glacial geology of the past, you can account for that. So this curve is a good indicator of average global temperature through the Cenozoic. You can see it's paratropical through the Paleocene, and it warms up towards the end of the Paleocene. You get this little spike, right? Anomalously warm for several 100,000 years. Then you get a general warming into the early Eocene, about 52 million years ago. It's this high warm period. Then you get overall cooling all the way through to the Oligocene. And it gets a little cooler, but mostly a lot drier. And you get Antarctic ice sheets starting in the late Eocene. They become greatly significant here in the Oligocene. And you have ocean circulation change. In the greenhouse world, ocean circulation was based on salt density and warm water. By the time you hit the early Oligocene, the ocean changes to what they call a cryosphere, or ice-dominated. There's so much ice in Antarctica that it's cooling the ocean water. That cold water is more dense and it sinks. So now all the ocean currents are driven by Antarctic cold water, or the cryosphere. So that's a big significant change and matters a whole lot to things in the ocean and on land, to weather patterns. So the Oligocene was a little cooler than the late Eocene, but particularly dry. Into the Miocene, all the way to the middle, it warmed up. So we're right here. And then through the late Eocene, it cooled off greatly. In particular, the Pleistocene got very cold, very seasonal. So, since 52 million years ago, overall climatic trend at high and middle latitudes, decreasing average global temperatures, dropped about 15 degrees Celsius. It's quite a bit. This produced drier, colder, more open habitat with greater seasonality. Big difference between summer and winter seasonality. So, greenhouse world, warmer earth, more ocean, evaporation, more rain, lots of trees. Trees, they love the rain. Icehouse world, cooler, drier, less and less trees, more and more open space. So if we look again at the climate change through the age of mammals in North America, mid-latitudes are paratropical, warm and wet, closed habitat, lots of trees. What dominated in paratropical habitat of the Paleocene were broadleaf evergreen forest. They dominated the middle latitudes. You go lower latitudes, it's tropical, of course. Then middle latitudes in the early Eocene were multistratal rainforest dominated, and it was the tropical belt got all the way up to 60 degrees latitude at the warm zenith in the early Eocene. In Texas, Kansas, and southern Saskatchewan, the rainfall was over a meter. That's a lot of water. Then as global cooling continued into the Eocene, you had broadleaf evergreen forests dominate the middle latitudes once again. Different forests, but still broadleaf evergreen. So the icehouse world, mid-latitudes were warm temperate, then they changed to cold temperate, starting at the end of the middle Miocene. Conditions got colder and drier, so more and more open habitat and decreasing tree cover. And the dominant plant in open habitat has been grasses in the Cenozoic. So what you see are more and more grasses. In the Miocene, you see extensive grasslands. In the Pliocene, you see more extensive grasslands. You see parkland. In the Pleistocene, you see steppes, treeless areas. So, what's odd about the Oligocene was deciduous woodland dominated. So you had a shift from broadleaf evergreen forests, paratropical, into warm temperate deciduous woodland. But you also had open habitat. You had drier open woodland. The trees were farther apart. You also had scrubland, very few trees, little short dinky trees, and bunch grasses. Open habitat became significant in the Oligocene, and that's important when you look at how mammals evolved through the Cenozoic. You start to see modern type mammals in the Oligocene. Why? The modern world is dominated by open habitat. Open habitat became significant in middle latitudes in the Oligocene. Guess where most people live and where most people dig fossils? The middle latitudes. So there you go. The Miocene is also called the Age of Savannas. The savanna is a mix of trees and true grassland. We have carpets of extensive grassland. The first extensive grasslands occurred in middle latitudes, right at the beginning of the Miocene. In North America, you had the first true savanna structure and first giraffe ecomorphs. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. Giraffes are savanna animals. As I mentioned, the Pliocene, you had parkland, extensive grasslands, and little clumps of trees. Rather than savanna, we had big clumps of trees. And then the Ice Age, parts of the continent were covered in steppes, truly prairie with no trees, or tundra, no trees. With a shift from a warm forested world to a cold open habitat one at high and middle latitudes, what changes in mammal community structure would one predict? Well, let's look at the mammal adaptations and niches, how they differ between Brazil and Kansas today. And there are some pictures to show you. Right? What would you expect to find in the prairie in Kansas? How would that differ from Brazil? Right? Where do you expect to find more tree dwellers? Where do you expect to find more and better runners? How do mammal adaptations and niches differ today between high and low latitudes? What types of mammals live in and on a tropical forest? Do you expect to see the above? What types of mammals do you expect in a tundra? Somehow that gibbon doesn't look happy in a tundra. Gibbon's a type of ape, by the way. That is the end of part 1 of 3. And please help support Barbie Barbophelus badasi. This is a dirk-toothed saber-tooth convergent to Feliformia felidae smilodon. It lived in North America 7 million years before Smilodon did, and is not a close relative, a convergent form, a dirk-toothed saber-tooth. Meow.